I'm Arya, 32 years old, and everything changed when my sister Lena stood at the podium during Milo's third grade graduation ceremony at Silvercrest Academy and decided to publicly humiliate me in front of 200 parents. You know what the difference is between real parents and people like my sister? She said, her voice carrying that practiced influencer cadence as she gestured toward me in the third row. Anyone can write checks. Real parents sacrifice for their children's education. The applause that followed felt like a slap, and I sat there with my forced smile, watching her bask in praise for sacrifices she'd never made, for tuition payments she'd never seen, for a financial burden that had been mine alone for 3 years. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that subscribe button and join me as I share how one graduation speech unraveled years of family lies and changed everything between my sister and me forever. Growing up, Lena had always been the golden child, the one who could charm her way out of any situation, while I sat quietly in the background, managing details and cleaning up messes. Our parents, David and Eliza, had died in a car accident 5 years earlier, leaving behind a complicated inheritance that split our family in ways we never expected. Lena inherited the family house, a beautiful colonial worth about $450,000, while I received what seemed like a smaller consolation prize, the rights to some tech patents our father had developed during his years as a software engineer. What Lena didn't know, what no one in my family knew, was that those patents generated roughly $2.3 million in licensing fees, providing me with a steady income that allowed me to live comfortably while maintaining my day job as a software architect. The secrecy around my financial situation wasn't intentional at first, but it became necessary as I watched how Lena handled money and responsibility. After David and Eliza's funeral, she'd immediately started posting on Instagram about her struggles as a single mother, conveniently omitting that her husband Jace lived with them and that she'd inherited a mortgage-free house. Her social media presence, at the Real Lena fans, portrayed her as a bootstrapping mother who worked multiple jobs to provide for Milo and Ivy, though the reality was that Jace's struggling music career and her sporadic influencer income barely covered their monthly expenses. When Milo started kindergarten, Lena had her heart set on Silvercrest Academy, the elite private school where tuition ran $42,500 per child annually. I still remember the family dinner where she announced her intention to enroll both kids at Silvercrest, her voice filled with determination that bordered on delusion. "I'll figure out the money somehow," she declared, while Jay sat beside her looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Other parents make it work. We can too." The next week, I quietly contacted Miss Patel in Silvercrest's billing department and arranged to cover both children's tuition anonymously, setting up the payments to appear as if they came from a family scholarship fund. I told myself it was for Milo and Ivy, that they deserved opportunities regardless of their parents' financial situation. But deep down, I knew I was enabling Lena's delusions while protecting myself from her inevitable requests for money. The arrangement worked seamlessly for 3 years. Lena genuinely believed her budgeting skills and sacrifice had made Silvercrest possible, often posting about skipping meals and working late nights to afford her children's education. She'd developed an entire online persona around being the mother who found a way, despite impossible odds, attracting thousands of followers who admired her dedication and shared their own struggling parent stories. Meanwhile, I watched from the sidelines as she received praise for financial management skills she didn't possess, for sacrifices she hadn't made, for a strength that was actually my bank account. Family gatherings became increasingly difficult as Lena's story grew more elaborate with each telling. Aunt Meredith and Uncle Ronan would shake their heads in admiration, commenting on how differently their daughters had turned out, how Lena had found her purpose while I remained focused on my simple career and childless life. The comparison stung, but I'd learned to absorb criticism silently. A skill developed during childhood when expressing frustration was met with lectures about being grateful and supportive. Every tuition payment felt like buying peace, a way to help the children while avoiding the family drama that would inevitably follow if anyone discovered the truth about my financial situation. What I didn't anticipate was how deeply Lena would internalize her fabricated narrative, how completely she would come to believe in her own sacrificial mythology. By the time Milo reached third grade, she had transformed from someone grateful for unexpected good fortune into someone convinced that her superior parenting and work ethic had earned her family's position at Silvercrest. The woman who stood at that graduation podium wasn't just taking credit for my payments, she was genuinely convinced that parents like me, who just wrote checks, were somehow inferior to parents like her, who truly sacrificed for their children's futures. The morning of Milo's graduation ceremony, I woke up with the familiar knot in my stomach that always accompanied family events at Silvercrest Academy. 3 years of sitting in audiences, watching Lena accept compliments for the children's academic achievements, while carefully crafting responses about her budgeting strategies, and creative financing solutions had worn down my patience in ways I hadn't fully recognized until that day. I'd chosen a simple navy dress, something that wouldn't draw attention, and arrived early to secure a seat in the back where I could observe without being pulled into conversations with other parents who might ask uncomfortable questions about my own non-existent children or my relationship to the family. The ceremony began, like every other Silvercrest event, with perfectly orchestrated presentations and speeches from administrators about the exceptional quality of education their students received. Mr. Hawthorne, the school counselor, introduced several parents who would speak about their experience with the Silvercrest community, and I felt my chest tighten when Lena's name was called. She'd mentioned being asked to speak, describing it as recognition for her inspirational journey as a parent who'd overcome financial obstacles to provide her children with elite education. Watching her walk to the podium in her expensive outfit, hair professionally styled for the Instagram photos she'd inevitably post later, I couldn't reconcile the image with the struggling single mother narrative she'd built her entire online presence around. Lena began her speech with practiced confidence, sharing carefully curated anecdotes about late nights budgeting and early mornings working extra hours to afford Silvercrest tuition. The audience was captivated by her story of determination, and I watched Mrs. Chen and Dr. Kim nodding approvingly in the front row, the same parents who'd often asked me why I didn't have children of my own, why I seemed disconnected from the school community despite attending every event. The sacrifice is worth it, Lena continued, her voice growing stronger as she warmed to her theme. When you see your children thriving in an environment like this, when you know you've given them opportunities you never had, every late night, every skipped meal, every creative solution becomes meaningful. Then she shifted, her gaze finding mine in the audience with the precision of someone who'd planned this moment carefully. "You know what the difference is between real parents and people like my sister?" she said, and the entire auditorium seemed to turn toward me. Anyone can write checks. Real parents sacrifice for their children's education. Real parents find ways to make the impossible possible through dedication and love, not just financial resources. The applause that erupted felt deafening, and I sat frozen as parents around me nodded in agreement, some glancing at me with expressions that suggested they were finally understanding my place in this community as someone who observed rather than participated, someone who had money but lacked the deeper commitment that real parenting required. After the ceremony, the congratulations directed toward Lena were overwhelming. Mr. Alvarez shook her hand enthusiastically, praising her for representing the values that made Silvercrest special, the idea that excellence came through effort rather than privilege. A group of mothers surrounded her, asking for advice about managing tight budgets while maintaining high educational standards for their children. And I watched Lena dispense wisdom about meal planning and side hustles with the authority of someone who genuinely lived through financial hardship. The irony was suffocating, but what struck me more deeply was how completely she'd convinced herself of the truth of her story. How genuinely moved she seemed by the praise she was receiving for sacrifices that existed only in her carefully constructed narrative. I made it to my car before the tears came, sitting in the Silvercrest parking lot as other families celebrated around me, feeling more isolated than I had since my parents' funeral. The public humiliation was devastating enough, but what broke something inside me was the realization that Lena didn't just take credit for my financial support. She genuinely believed she deserved that credit. Somewhere along the way, my anonymous payments had become proof of her superior parenting, evidence of her ability to make things work through determination and sacrifice. The sister who'd grown up beside me had transformed into someone who could look directly at me while accepting praise for my generosity, without any apparent awareness of the cruelty in her words. That evening, I sat in my home office staring at the computer screen, the Silvercrest Academy billing portal open in front of me. For 3 years, I'd received automated payment confirmations without really examining the details, trusting that my monthly transfers were covering tuition and fees as arranged. But something about Lena's confident performance that afternoon made me want to understand exactly how the financial arrangement worked, what other benefits she might be receiving based on her claimed income level. What I discovered in the next hour of digging through documents and cross-referencing financial aid records would change everything between us, would force me to confront not just Lena's public humiliation, but the systematic fraud she'd been committing while building her inspirational online brand. Ms. Patel had included detailed notes in the student files, and as I read through Milo and Ivy's records, I found applications for need-based financial assistance that Lena had submitted each year, claiming household income below the poverty line and requesting emergency hardship funds. According to her paperwork, she was a single mother working multiple minimum wage jobs, struggling to afford basic necessities while somehow managing full tuition payments through extreme budgeting and family support. The school had awarded her family over $15,000 in additional financial aid over the past 2 years, money specifically designated for families facing genuine financial crises. Money that could have helped parents who actually needed assistance while Lena built her social media following on fabricated stories of struggle and sacrifice. The financial aid discovery sent me down a research spiral that consumed my entire weekend. I printed every document, cross-referenced every claim, and built a timeline of Lena's lies that stretched back to Milo's first day at Silvercrest Academy. The poverty-level income she'd reported to the school didn't match the lifestyle she documented on Instagram, where her 47,000 followers regularly saw photos of expensive organic groceries, designer children's clothing, and weekend trips to places that required significant disposable income. Her most recent post, uploaded just hours after humiliating me at graduation, showed her and Jace at an upscale restaurant celebrating another milestone in our parenting journey, with hashtags like "our mom hustle" and "our child's sacrifice is worth it," generating hundreds of supportive comments from followers who believed they were watching a struggling mother treat herself for once. I spent Saturday afternoon calling the school's billing department under the pretense of updating my payment information, and Miss Patel inadvertently revealed details that made Lena's fraud even more extensive than I'd initially understood. "The Reynolds family has been such an inspiration," she said warmly. "Mrs. Reynolds' financial hardship applications are always so well documented, and her children are thriving despite their difficult circumstances. We've been able to provide meal assistance, textbook vouchers, and even transportation subsidies because of their demonstrated need." Each additional benefit represented money taken from families who genuinely struggled to feed their children, who actually worked multiple jobs and skipped meals and made the sacrifices Lena claimed to make while building her online empire on fabricated stories of hardship. The transportation subsidies were particularly galling because I knew Lena drove a leased BMW that she'd somehow managed to finance despite her claimed poverty-level income. Her Instagram stories frequently featured the car's interior during her school pickup routine, though she was careful to frame these videos to hide the luxury vehicle's distinctive details. Sunday morning, I drove to Silvercrest Academy and waited in the pickup lane, watching as Lena pulled up in the BMW, laughing at something Ivy was saying while Milo loaded his expensive lacrosse equipment into the trunk. Other parents in older, more practical vehicles waved at her warmly, some of them likely the same families who'd been denied financial assistance because the school's limited funds had already been allocated to families like Lena's, families whose applications painted pictures of desperation, while reality showed comfort built on systematic deception. The most devastating discovery came when I accessed Lena's public financial planning blog, something she'd launched 6 months earlier as another platform for sharing her money wisdom with struggling parents. Her posts detailed elaborate budgeting strategies that supposedly allowed her to afford Silvercrest tuition while maintaining a household on less than $30,000 annually, complete with spreadsheets and meal plans that her followers shared enthusiastically in the comments. One post, titled "How I Paid Private School Tuition on a Poverty Income," had been shared over 2,000 times and featured testimonials from other parents who tried to implement her strategies without success. Women who apologized in the comments for not being as disciplined or creative as Lena when it came to financial management. Reading their self-blame while knowing the truth about Lena's situation felt like watching someone kick people who were already down, profiting from their desperation while accepting praise for wisdom she didn't possess. Tuesday afternoon, I received a call from Uncle Ronan that confirmed how deeply Lena's deception had penetrated our extended family. "We've been talking about nominating Lena for that Community Leadership Award," he said, his voice filled with pride. "What she's accomplished as a single mother, putting those kids through private school on her income? It's remarkable. Aunt Meredith thinks she should write a book about financial planning for struggling families. Can you imagine the help she could provide to other parents in her situation?" The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with Ronan describing Lena's inspiring example and wondering why I couldn't show more support for my sister's achievements. Why I seemed distant from the family when Lena had overcome so much adversity to create stability for her children. That evening, I sat in my kitchen with 3 years of financial records spread across the table, calculating exactly how much money I'd transferred to cover tuition, fees, and expenses that Lena had claimed as evidence of her sacrificial parenting. The total exceeded $280,000, not including the additional financial aid she'd fraudulently obtained by misrepresenting her family's circumstances. But the money wasn't what devastated me most deeply. It was the realization that every thank you note she'd written, every social media post about gratitude and hard work, every family dinner where she'd shared wisdom about financial planning had been performed while knowing she was accepting credit for my generosity, while building a personal brand on lies that hurt genuinely struggling families and perpetuated harmful myths about poverty and hard work. I opened my laptop and navigated to the Silvercrest Academy payment portal, staring at the interface that had automatically processed my monthly transfers for 3 years without question or acknowledgement. The next payment was scheduled for the following Monday, the start of a new academic year when Milo would enter 4th grade and Ivy would begin 2nd grade. For the first time since I'd started covering their tuition, I found myself considering what would happen if that payment didn't go through. What kind of phone call Lena would receive from Ms. Patel, what explanation she would offer to the school administration and her online followers when her carefully constructed narrative finally collided with reality. The power I held was absolute and immediate. With a few clicks, I could cancel the automatic payments, withdraw the scholarship fund, and force Lena to confront the financial reality she'd been hiding behind for years. But as I sat there in the silence of my kitchen, surrounded by evidence of her systematic deception, I realized that the decision I was contemplating wasn't just about money or justice or even revenge. It was about whether I was willing to let 2 innocent children pay the price for their mother's lies. Whether destroying Lena's fabricated image was worth the collateral damage it would inevitably cause to Milo and Ivy, who had done nothing wrong except be born to a mother who valued social media validation more than honesty or genuine gratitude. The decision to act didn't come from anger, though I felt plenty of that. It came from something colder and more calculated, a realization that Lena's lies were actively harming other families while she built her reputation on my generosity. Wednesday morning, I took the day off work and drove to Silvercrest Academy with a folder containing every document I'd collected over the weekend. The meeting I'd requested with Ms. Patel was scheduled for 10 a.m., ostensibly to discuss updating my anonymous scholarship arrangement, but my real purpose was to understand exactly how much damage Lena's fraud had caused and what options I had for correcting the situation. Ms. Patel greeted me warmly in her small office, surrounded by filing cabinets and motivational posters about education being the key to success. "It's so wonderful to finally meet you in person," she said, shaking my hand enthusiastically. "The Reynolds family scholarship has been such a blessing for those children. Mrs. Reynolds speaks about your family's generosity frequently, though she's always been modest about the details." The irony of Lena being modest about anything related to my financial support would have been funny if it weren't so infuriating. But I maintained my composure as Ms. Patel pulled up the account information on her computer screen. What I learned during that hour-long meeting solidified my resolve in ways I hadn't expected. Not only had Lena received the need-based financial aid I discovered, but she'd also been selected as the school's parent ambassador for families facing financial hardship, a role that came with a small stipend and the responsibility of counseling other struggling parents about resource management and scholarship opportunities. "She's been invaluable in that position," Ms. Patel explained, showing me testimonials from families Lena had supposedly helped navigate the financial aid process. Her own experience overcoming poverty while maintaining academic excellence for her children makes her uniquely qualified to guide other families through similar challenges. The final revelation came when Ms. Patel mentioned that Lena had been invited to speak at the National Association of Independent Schools conference in September, presenting a workshop titled "Turning Financial Hardship into Educational Opportunity." The speaking fee was modest, but the exposure would significantly expand her platform and potentially lead to book deals or consulting opportunities. "She's become something of a celebrity in education circles," Ms. Patel said proudly. "Her story resonates with so many families who think private education is beyond their reach. She's proof that with enough determination and sacrifice, anything is possible." I left Silvercrest Academy with a clear understanding of what I needed to do and exactly how to do it. The scholarship arrangement I'd established gave me complete control over the payments, with the ability to modify or cancel the funding at any time without advance notice. More importantly, I learned that tuition for the upcoming academic year was due in full by the first day of classes, which was exactly 1 week away. Any payment delays or cancellations after that deadline would result in immediate enrollment suspension, meaning Milo and Ivy would be asked to leave campus the same day their tuition was declined. That afternoon, I sat in my home office and carefully crafted an email to Ms. Patel, explaining that due to unexpected changes in my financial situation, I would need to discontinue the Reynolds family scholarship effective immediately. I backdated the email, but scheduled it to send automatically on Monday morning at 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes after the school's administrative offices opened and exactly when the first tuition payment of the new academic year would be processed. The timing would ensure that Lena had no opportunity to find alternative funding or negotiate payment plans, that the consequences of losing my support would be immediate and public. The weekend brought an unexpected test of my resolve when Lena called to invite me to a family barbecue at her house Sunday afternoon. "I know things have been weird between us since graduation," she said, her voice carrying that practiced sweetness she used when she wanted something. "But Jace is grilling, and the kids would love to see their Aunt Arya. Plus, I have some exciting news to share about my speaking engagement in September." The invitation felt like an opportunity to observe her performance one last time, to see how completely she'd internalized her fictional narrative before reality forced her to confront the truth about her situation. Sunday afternoon at Lena's house was a masterclass in cognitive dissonance. She moved through her beautiful home, pointing out recent renovations and new furniture while describing to other family members how carefully she'd budgeted for each purchase, how many extra hours she'd worked to afford the organic catering spread across her dining room table. Uncle Ronan and Aunt Meredith hung on her every word, marveling at her ability to create abundance through discipline and hard work, while I sat on her expensive patio furniture, knowing that my monthly payments had funded the very lifestyle she was crediting to her superior financial management skills. The breaking point came when Lena stood up during dinner and announced her speaking engagement at the education conference, describing how honored she felt to share her journey from poverty to empowerment with other struggling families. "Sometimes I can't believe this is my life," she said, her voice emotional as she looked around at her family and friends. 5 years ago, after Mom and Dad died, I thought Milo and Ivy would never have opportunities like this. But when you're willing to sacrifice everything for your children, when you refuse to accept limitations, amazing things become possible." The applause that followed her impromptu speech was genuine and enthusiastic, and I realized that tomorrow's email wouldn't just cancel tuition payments, it would destroy a carefully constructed mythology that had become central to how my entire family understood success, sacrifice, and personal responsibility. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, knowing that in less than 12 hours, my scheduled email would trigger a series of events that would fundamentally alter Lena's life and potentially damage her relationship with her children, her husband, and our extended family. But I also knew that continuing to enable her lies meant continuing to watch her profit from stories of hardship she'd never experienced, meant watching her accept financial aid that should have gone to families who actually needed it, meant allowing her to build her entire identity on achievements that belonged to me, while treating me as someone whose only value was my ability to write checks without understanding real sacrifice. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp September air that usually marked new beginnings, but I felt nothing but dread as I sat in my kitchen watching the clock approach 8:45 a.m. My laptop was open to the email scheduling system, showing the message that would automatically send in exactly 3 minutes. And for a moment I considered canceling the whole thing, continuing the charade for another semester while I figured out a less destructive way to handle Lena's deception. But then I remembered her speech at the barbecue, the way she'd looked directly at me while describing her journey from poverty to empowerment, and I closed the laptop without changing anything. At 8:47 a.m., my phone rang with Lena's contact information flashing on the screen. I was in the middle of a project review meeting with my development team, discussing timeline adjustments for a client's software rollout, when her call came through for the third time in 2 minutes. "Sorry, I need to take this," I told my colleagues, stepping into the hallway with my heart racing despite knowing exactly what was happening. Lena's voice was frantic when I answered, higher pitched than I'd ever heard it, with Milo and Ivy crying audibly in the background. "Arya, something's wrong with the school payments. They're saying our tuition was declined and the kids have to leave immediately. There must be some mistake with the scholarship fund." "What scholarship fund?" I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral, while my coworkers continued their meeting just a few feet away. The question seemed to catch Lena off guard, and there was a long pause before she responded with obvious confusion. "The family scholarship fund, the one that's been covering tuition for 3 years. Miss Patel said the funding was canceled this morning, and there's no backup payment method on file. They're saying we owe $85,000 for both kids, and if we can't pay immediately, they have to withdraw from enrollment." Her breathing was rapid and shallow, the sound of someone approaching panic as reality crashed through carefully constructed delusions. "Have you tried calling Jace?" I suggested, still maintaining the pretense that this was news to me while watching through the conference room window as my team debated technical specifications. "Maybe he has some ideas about short-term financing options." Lena's laugh was bitter and hysterical, and I could hear her moving through the house, probably pacing in the way she'd done since childhood when stress overwhelmed her ability to think clearly. "Jace doesn't know about any of this. He thinks we've been getting financial aid from the school, some kind of merit-based assistance. I never told him about the scholarship fund because I thought it might make him feel bad about not contributing more to the kids' education." The conversation continued for 10 more minutes, with Lena alternating between pleading for information about how to contact the scholarship administrators and describing the scene unfolding at Silvercrest Academy, where Officer Ramos was waiting to escort Milo and Ivy off campus if payment couldn't be arranged within the hour. "Other parents are watching," she whispered, her voice breaking. Mrs. Chen asked if everything was okay when she saw me crying in the parking lot. I told her it was just a billing error, but I don't think she believed me. "Arya, I don't know what to do." The kids are asking why they can't go to their classrooms and I can't explain something I don't understand myself. After I hung up, I returned to my meeting and tried to focus on sprint planning and resource allocation while my phone buzzed continuously with texts from Lena. The messages started as informational updates about her attempts to resolve the payment issue, but quickly devolved into desperate pleas for any information I might have about the mysterious scholarship fund that had suddenly disappeared. Called the main office and they said the scholarship donor requested anonymity and they can't provide contact information, one text read. Tried calling Uncle Ronan to see if he knew anything about family funds, but he's in meetings all day. By noon, the situation had escalated beyond anything I'd anticipated. Lena's Instagram stories, usually carefully curated content about parenting wins and lifestyle inspiration, became a real-time documentation of her crisis as she tried to manage the school situation while maintaining her public image. Dealing with some unexpected administrative challenges today, she posted over a photo of herself sitting in her car outside Silvercrest Academy. Sometimes even the most organized parents face surprising obstacles, but we'll figure this out together as a family. The comments section filled with supportive messages from followers who had no idea they were witnessing the collapse of everything she'd built her online presence around. The final text I received from Lena that afternoon was a screenshot of a conversation with Jace, who had apparently left work early to help handle the crisis. His messages revealed that he'd been completely unaware of the family's true financial situation at Silvercrest Academy, believing for 3 years that Lena's budgeting skills and part-time income had somehow covered $85,000 annually in private school tuition. "How is this possible?" he'd written. "Where did you think the money was coming from? Why didn't you tell me we were getting charity from your family?" The screenshot was followed by a single message from Lena. "Can you please call me back? I think I might know who the scholarship donor was, but I need to talk to you first." That evening, I sat in my living room with my phone turned off, knowing that Lena had probably figured out the truth about my involvement, but needing time to process what I'd set in motion before facing her inevitable confrontation. The silence felt both peaceful and ominous, like the calm that follows a storm but precedes the cleanup. I'd achieved exactly what I'd planned, forcing Lena to confront the reality of her financial dependence, while exposing her lies to the school community and potentially her online followers. But I hadn't anticipated how completely the revelation would devastate not just Lena, but Jace, who seemed genuinely shocked to discover that his family's lifestyle had been subsidized by charity he'd never known existed. The next morning brought a certified letter from Silvercrest Academy, formally notifying me that the Reynolds family scholarship had been discontinued and that Milo and Ivy's enrollment had been suspended pending resolution of their outstanding tuition balance. Attached was a note from Miss Patel expressing disappointment that the scholarship fund had ended so abruptly, especially given Mrs. Reynolds' prominent role in the school community and her upcoming speaking engagement about overcoming financial hardship in education. The irony was perfect and devastating. Lena's fraud had been exposed at the moment when her fabricated expertise was about to reach its largest audience, when the lies she'd built her identity around were supposed to inspire and guide other struggling families toward the success she'd never actually achieved on her own. The aftermath unfolded more slowly and destructively than I'd anticipated. 3 days after Milo and Ivy were escorted off the Silvercrest Academy campus, Lena finally called me from a number I didn't recognize, her voice hollow in a way I'd never heard before. "I know it was you," she said without preamble. "The scholarship fund, the payments, all of it. Jace figured it out when he started asking questions about our finances. He wants to know why I lied to him for 3 years about where the money was coming from, why I let him think we were barely scraping by when you were covering everything." The conversation that followed lasted 2 hours, with Lena alternating between fury at my betrayal and desperate attempts to negotiate some kind of payment plan that would allow the children to return to school before they fell too far behind academically. What struck me most during that call wasn't Lena's anger, which I'd expected, but her genuine confusion about why I'd withdrawn my support so suddenly. "If you were upset about the graduation speech, you could have talked to me," she said, her voice breaking. "The kids don't deserve to be punished because we had a fight. Milo keeps asking when he can see his friends again, and Ivy cries every night because she thinks she did something wrong." The conversation forced me to confront the collateral damage of my decision. The reality that exposing Lena's lies meant creating genuine trauma for 2 children who had become accustomed to privileges they'd never realized were dependent on my continued generosity and tolerance for deception. By the end of the week, the ripple effects had spread throughout our extended family in ways that surprised me. Uncle Ronan called Thursday evening, his voice tight with disappointment, as he explained that Aunt Meredith had been contacted by other Silvercrest Academy parents, asking questions about our family's financial situation. "People are saying Lena was taking charity while claiming to be self-sufficient. he said. Some are suggesting fraud, that she was getting financial aid meant for families who actually needed it. Meredith is embarrassed to show her face at the country club because everyone's talking about the Reynolds family scandal. The shame in his voice reminded me of childhood family gatherings, where appearance and reputation mattered more than honesty or genuine connection. Lena's online presence, which had taken years to build, began disintegrating within days of the school incident. Her followers, who had invested emotionally in her journey from poverty to educational empowerment, started asking pointed questions about the scholarship fund and whether her financial struggles had been exaggerated for content creation purposes. "Feeling like I've been lied to by someone I really looked up to," read one comment with hundreds of likes. "If she had family money this whole time, what does that say about all the advice she gave us about budgeting and sacrifice?" The speaking engagement at the National Association of Independent Schools conference was quietly canceled, with the organization citing scheduling conflicts, though Lena suspected they'd received information about her misrepresentation of her financial circumstances. The most devastating consequence came 2 weeks later when Jace moved out of the house, taking Milo and Ivy with him to stay at his parents' place while he figured out next steps for their marriage and the children's education. "He says he can't trust me anymore," Lena told me during one of our increasingly frequent phone calls. "Not just about the money, but about everything. He's wondering what else I've lied about, what other parts of our life together have been performance instead of reality." The separation forced practical decisions about the children's schooling, and after researching public school options in their district, Jason enrolled them at Lincoln Elementary, a perfectly adequate school that nonetheless represented a dramatic shift in social status and educational expectations. The most unexpected development came a month after canceling the scholarship fund, when I received a call from Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the executive director of a nonprofit organization that provided educational assistance to legitimately struggling families in our region. "We've heard about your family's situation," she said carefully, "and we're wondering if you might be interested in channeling your educational philanthropy through our organization, where we can ensure funding goes to families who have been thoroughly vetted for genuine financial need." The conversation led to establishing the David and Eliza Reynolds Memorial Scholarship Fund, a legitimate charitable foundation that would provide educational assistance to families who actually met the poverty criteria Lena had falsely claimed for 3 years. Working with Dr. Walsh's organization gave me perspective on the real impact of Lena's fraud beyond our family drama. The $15,000 in need-based financial aid she'd received could have covered partial tuition for 3 different families, assistance that might have kept children in school who were forced to withdraw when legitimate applications were denied due to limited funding. Educational fraud is more common than people realize, Dr. Walsh explained during one of our planning meetings. Families who inflate their financial struggles not only take resources from those who genuinely need them, but they also make schools more suspicious of legitimate hardship cases, creating additional barriers for families who are actually in crisis. 6 months after the Silvercrest Academy incident, I received a letter from Lena that arrived on the anniversary of our parents' death. Her handwriting was shakier than I remembered, and the content was unlike anything she'd ever written to me before. "I've been in therapy for 3 months, she wrote, "trying to understand how I convinced myself that taking credit for your generosity was somehow justified, how I built my entire identity around struggles I never actually experienced. The therapist says I've been living in a fantasy where being needed and admired mattered more than being honest, where validation from strangers became more important than genuine relationships with family." The letter continued for 3 pages, acknowledging specific lies and expressing regret not just for the financial deception, but for the years of taking my quiet support for granted, while publicly diminishing my contributions as mere check writing. The healing process, when it finally began, was slower and more complicated than either of us had expected. Lena and Jace eventually reconciled after months of counseling, though their relationship remained strained by questions about trust and honesty that extended far beyond the education scandal. Milo and Ivy adjusted to Lincoln Elementary better than anyone anticipated, making new friends and discovering interests that had been overshadowed by the pressure of maintaining their status at Silvercrest Academy. Our family gatherings resumed tentatively, with conversations that felt more genuine but also more careful, as if everyone was still learning how to interact without the performance and deception that had characterized our relationships for years. The David and Eliza Reynolds Memorial Scholarship Fund has now provided educational assistance to 47 children from legitimately struggling families, covering everything from private school tuition to college preparation programs to basic school supplies for families who couldn't afford notebooks and pencils. Each scholarship recipient goes through extensive vetting to ensure genuine need, and the families write thank you letters that remind me why education matters and why protecting these opportunities from fraud is essential for maintaining public trust in charitable giving. Sometimes the worst betrayals from the people closest to us lead us toward more meaningful ways of making a positive impact, toward understanding the difference between enabling someone's lies and actually helping people who need support. The relationship between Lena and me will never return to what it was before, but perhaps that's for the better. The sister who publicly mocked my contributions, while privately depending on them, has been replaced by someone who seems to understand, finally, that real sacrifice involves admitting your limitations and asking for help honestly, not building elaborate lies to maintain an image of independence you never actually achieved. And I've learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is stop protecting them from the consequences of their choices, even when that means watching them face painful truths about themselves and the damage their deception has caused to everyone around them.